See here, it was like this, he said at last. There was something in that case, some piece of evidence, slight in itself perhaps, but still enough of a clue to connect the murderer with the crime. It was vital to him that it should be destroyed before it was discovered and its significance appreciated. Therefore he took the risk, the great risk of coming in here. Finding the case locked, he was obliged to force it, thus betraying his presence. For him to take that risk, it must have been something of great importance. But what was it? Ah, cried Perrault with a gesture of anger, that I do not know. A document of some kind, without doubt, possibly the scrap of paper Dorcas saw in her hand yesterday afternoon. And I, his anger burst forth freely, miserable animal that I am, guessed nothing. I have behaved like an imbecile. I should never have left that case here. I should have carried it away with me, a triple pig, and now it is gone. It is destroyed. But is it destroyed? Is there not yet a chance? We must leave no stone unturned. He rushed like a madman from the room, and I followed him as soon as I had sufficiently recovered my wits. But by the time I had reached the top of the stairs, he was out of sight. Mary Cavendish was standing where the staircase branched, staring down into the hall in the direction in which he had disappeared. What has happened to your extraordinary little friend, Mr. Hastings? He has just rushed past me like a mad bull. He's rather upset about something, I remarked feebly. I really did not know how much Perrault would wish me to disclose. As I saw a faint smile gather on Mrs. Cavendish's expressive mouth, I endeavored to try and turn the conversation by saying, "They haven't met yet, have they? Who? Mr. Inglethorpe and Miss Howard?" She looked at me in rather a disconcerting manner. "Do you think it would be such a disaster if they did meet?" "Well, don't you?" I said, rather taken aback. "No," she was smiling in her quiet way. "I should like to see a good flare-up. It would clear the air. At present we are all thinking so much and saying so little." "John doesn't think so," I remarked. "He's anxious to keep them apart." "Oh, John." Something in her tone fired me, and I blurted out, "Old John's an awfully good sort." She studied me curiously for a minute or two, and then she said to my great surprise, "You are loyal to your friend. I like you for that." "Aren't you my friend, too?" "I am a very bad friend." "Why do you say that?" "Because it is true. I am charming to my friends one day and forget all about them the next." I don't know what impelled me, but I was nettled, and I said foolishly and not in the best of taste, "Yet you seem to be invariably charming to Dr. Bauerstein." Instantly I regretted my words. Her face stiffened. I had the impression of a steel curtain coming down and blotting out the real woman. Without a word she turned and went swiftly up the stairs, whilst I stood like an idiot gaping after her. I was recalled to other matters by a frightful row going on below. I could hear Perrault shouting and expounding. I was vexed to think that my diplomacy had been in vain. The little man appeared to be taking the whole house into his confidence, a proceeding of which I, for one, doubted the wisdom. Once again I could not help regretting that my friend was so prone to lose his head in moments of excitement. I stepped briskly down the stairs. The sight of me calmed Perrault almost immediately. I drew him aside. "My dear fellow," I said, "is this wise? Surely you don't want the whole house to know of this occurrence. You are actually playing into the criminal's hands." "You think so, Hastings?" "I am sure of it." "Well, well, my friend, I will be guided by you." "Good, although unfortunately it's a little too late now, true." He looked so crestfallen and abashed that I felt quite sorry, though I still thought my rebuke a just and wise one. "Well," he said at last, "let us go, mon ami. You have finished here for the moment, yes. You will walk back with me to the village?" "Willingly." He picked up his little suitcase and we went out through the open window in the drawing room. Cynthia Murdoch was just coming in, and Perrault stood aside to let her pass. "Excuse me, mademoiselle, one minute." "Yes," she turned inquiringly. "Did you ever make up Mrs. Inglethorpe's medicines?" A slight flush rose in her face as she answered rather constrainedly, "No." "Only her powders?" The flush deepened as Cynthia replied, "Oh, yes, I did make up some sleeping powders for her once. These?" Perrault produced the empty box which had contained powders. She nodded. "Can you tell me what they were?" "Sulfonal, veronal." "No, they were bromide powders." "Ah, thank you, mademoiselle. Good morning." As we walked briskly away from the house, I glanced at him more than once. I had often before noticed that if anything excited him, his eyes turned green like a cat's. They were shining like emeralds now. "My friend," he broke out at last, "I have a little idea, a very strange and probably utterly impossible idea, and yet it fits in." I shrugged my shoulders. I privately thought that Perrault was rather too much given to these fantastic ideas. In this case, surely the truth was only too plain and apparent. "So that is the explanation of the blank label on the box," I remarked. "Very simple, as you said. I really wonder that I did not think of it myself." Perrault did not appear to be listening to me. "They have made one more discovery, la Baste," he observed, jerking his thumb over his shoulder in the direction of Styles. "Mr. Wells told me as we were going upstairs." "What was it?" "Locked up in the desk in the boudoir, they found a will of Mrs. Inglethorpe's dated before her marriage, leaving her fortune to Alfred Inglethorpe. It must have been made just at the time they were engaged. It came as quite a surprise to Wells and to John Cavendish also. It was written on one of those printed will forms and witnessed by two of the servants, not Dorcas. Did Mr. Inglethorpe know of it? He says not. One might take that with a grain of salt, I remarked skeptically. All these wills are very confusing. Tell me, how did those scribbled words on the envelope help you to discover that a will was made yesterday afternoon? Perrault smiled. Mon ami, have you ever, when writing a letter, been arrested by the fact that you did not know how to spell a certain word? Yes, often. I suppose everyone has. Exactly. And have you not, in such a case, tried the word once or twice on the edge of the blotting paper or a spare scrap of paper to see if it looked right? Well, that is what Mrs. Inglethorpe did. You will notice that the word possessed is spelt first with one S and subsequently with two correctly. To make sure, she had further tried it in a sentence. Thus, I am possessed. Now, what did that tell me? It told me that Mrs. Inglethorpe had been writing the word possessed that afternoon, and having the fragment of paper found in the grate fresh in my mind, the possibility of a will, a document almost certain to contain that word, occurred to me at once. This possibility was confirmed by a further circumstance. In the general confusion, the boudoir had not been swept that morning, and near the desk were several traces of brown mold and earth. The weather had been perfectly fine for some days, and no ordinary boots would have left such a heavy deposit. I strolled through the window and saw at once that the begonia beds had been newly planted. The mold in the beds was exactly similar to that on the floor of the boudoir, and also I learned from Eve that they had been planted yesterday afternoon. I was now sure that one or possibly both of the gardeners, for there were two sets of footprints in the bed, had entered the boudoir. For if Mrs. Inglethorpe had merely wished to speak to them, she would in all probability have stood at the window, and they would not have come into the room at all. I was now quite convinced that she had made a fresh will, and had called the two gardeners in to witness their signature. Events proved that I was right in my supposition. That was very ingenious, I could not help admitting. I must confess that the conclusions I drew from those few scribbled words were quite erroneous. He smiled. You gave too much rein to your imagination. Imagination is a good servant and a bad master. The simplest explanation is always the most likely. Another point, how did you know the key of the despatch case had been lost? I did not know it. It was a guess that turned out to be correct. You observed that it had a piece of twisted wire through the handle. That suggested to me at once it had possibly been wrenched off a flimsy key ring. Now, if it had been lost and recovered, Mrs. Inglethorpe would at once have replaced it on her bunch. But on her bunch I found what was obviously the duplicate key, very new and bright, which led me to the hypothesis that somebody else had inserted the original key in the lock of the despatch case. Yes, I said, Alfred Inglethorpe, without a doubt. Perrault looked at me curiously. You are very sure of his guilt? Well, naturally, every fresh circumstance seems to establish it more clearly. On the contrary, said Perrault quietly, there are several points in his favor. Oh, come now. Yes, I see only one, and that he was not in the house last night. Bad shot, as you English say. You have chosen the one point that to my mind tells against him. How is that? Because if Mr. Inglethorpe knew that his wife would be poisoned last night, he would certainly have arranged to be away from the house. His excuse was an obviously trumped-up one. That leaves us two possibilities. Either he knew what was going to happen, or he had a reason of his own for his absence. And that reason, I asked skeptically. Perrault shrugged his shoulders. How should I know? Discreditable without a doubt. This Mr. Inglethorpe, I should say, is somewhat of a scoundrel, but that does not of necessity, make him a murderer. I shook my head, unconvinced. We do not agree, eh? Said Perrault. Well, let us leave it. Time will show which one of us is right. Now let us turn to the other aspects of the case. What do you make of the fact that all the doors of the bedroom were bolted on the inside? Well, I considered, one must look at it logically. True. I should put it this way. The doors were bolted. Our own eyes have told us that. Yet the presence of the candle grease on the floor and the destruction of the will prove that during the night someone entered the room. You agreed so far? Perfectly. Put with admirable clearness. Proceed. Well, I said, encouraged, as the person who entered did not do so by the window nor by miraculous means, it follows that the door must have been opened from inside by Mrs. Inglethorpe herself. That strengthens the conviction that the person in question was her husband. She would naturally open the door to her own husband. Perrault shook his head. Why should she? She had bolted the door leading into his room, a most unusual proceeding on her part. She had had a most violent quarrel with him that very afternoon. No, he was the last person she would admit. But you agree with me that the door must have been opened by Mrs. Inglethorpe herself? There's another possibility. She may have forgotten to bolt the door into the passage when she went up to bed, and have got up later towards morning and bolted it then. Perrault, is that seriously your opinion? No, I do not say it is so, but it might be. Now turn to another feature. What do you make of the scrap of conversation you overheard between Mrs. Cavendish and her mother-in-law? I'd forgotten that, I said thoughtfully. That is as enigmatical as ever. It seems incredible that a woman like Mrs. Cavendish, proud and reticent to the last degree, should interfere so violently in what was certainly not her affair. Precisely. It was an astonishing thing for a woman of her breeding to do. It is certainly curious, I agreed. Still, it is unimportant and need not be taken into account. A groan burst from Perrault. What have I always told you? Everything must be taken into account. If the fact will not fit the theory, let the theory go. Well, we shall see, I said, nettled. Yes, we shall see. We had reached Leathwaite's cottage, and Perrault ushered me upstairs into his own room. He offered me one of the tiny Russian cigarettes he himself occasionally smoked. I was amused to notice that he stowed away the used matches most carefully in a little china pot. My momentary annoyance vanished. Perrault had placed our 2 chairs in front of the open window which commanded a view of the village street. The fresh air blew in warm and pleasant. It was going to be a hot day. Suddenly my attention was arrested by a weedy-looking young man rushing down the street at a great pace. It was the expression on his face that was extraordinary, a curious mingling of terror and agitation. Look, Perrault, I said. He leaned forward. Tiens, he said, it is Mr. Mace from the chemist's shop. He is coming here. The young man came to a halt before Leathwaite College, and after hesitating a moment, pounded vigorously at the door. A little minute, cried Perrault from the window. I come. Motioning to me to follow him, he ran swiftly down the stairs and opened the door. Mr. Mace began at once. Oh, Mr. Perrault, I am sorry for the inconvenience, but I heard that you just come back from the hall. Yes, we have. The young man moistened his dry lips. His face was working curiously. It's all over the village about old Mrs. Inglethorpe dying so suddenly. They do say, he lowered his voice cautiously, that it's poison. Perrault's face remained quite impassive. Only the doctors can tell us that, Mr. Mace. Yes, exactly, of course. The young man hesitated, and then his agitation was too much for him. He clutched Perrault by the arm and sank his voice to a whisper. Just tell me this, Mr. Perrault. It isn't strychnine, is it? I hardly heard what Perrault replied, something evidently of a non-committal nature. The young man departed, and as he closed the door, Perrault's eyes met mine. Yes, he said, nodding gravely. He will have the evidence to give at the inquest. We went slowly upstairs again. I was opening my lips when Perrault stopped me with a gesture of his hand. Not now, mon ami. I have need of reflection. My mind is in some disorder, which is not well. For about 10 minutes he sat in dead silence, perfectly still, except for several expressive motions of his eyebrows, and all the time his eyes grew slowly greener. At last he heaved a deep sigh. It is well. The bad moment has passed. Now all is arranged and classified. One must never permit confusion. The case is not clear yet, no, for it is of the most complicated. It puzzles me, Hercule Poirot. There are 2 facts of significance, and what are they? The first is the state of the weather yesterday. That is very important. But it was a glorious day, I interrupted. Poirot, you're pulling my leg. Not at all. The thermometer registered 80 degrees in the shade. Do not forget that, my friend. It is the key to the whole riddle. And the second point, I asked, the important fact that Monsieur Inglethorpe wears very peculiar clothes, has a black beard, and uses glasses. Poirot, I cannot believe you are serious. I am absolutely serious, my friend, but this is childish. No, it is very momentous. And supposing the coroner's jury returns a verdict of willful murder against Alfred Inglethorpe, what becomes of your theories then? They would not be shaken because 12 stupid men had happened to make a mistake. But that will not occur. For one thing, a country jury is not anxious to take responsibility upon itself, and Mr. Inglethorpe stands practically in the position of local squire. Also, he added placidly, I should not allow it. You would not allow it? No. I looked at the extraordinary little man, divided between annoyance and amusement. He was so tremendously sure of himself. As though he read my thoughts, he nodded gently. Oh, yes, mon ami, I would do what I say. He got up and laid his hand on my shoulder. His physiognomy underwent a complete change. Tears came into his eyes. In all this, you see, I think of the poor Mrs. Inglethorpe who is dead. She was not extravagantly loved, no, but she was very good to us Belgians. I owe her a debt. I endeavored to interrupt, but Poirot swept on. Let me tell you this, Hastings. She would never forgive me if I let Alfred Inglethorpe, her husband, be arrested now, when a word from me could save him.